Welcome back to The Resilient Responder, a podcast dedicated to the men and women of our first responder and military communities. Here we talk about the job, mental wellness and resiliency, coaching, family, and living our best lives. Now, once again, here is your host, Keith Hanks.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Resilient Responder podcast. I, again, am your host, Keith Hanks. Today's guest is Brian Paul, founder and president of Veterans for Life. Brian was raised in Mustang, Oklahoma, served as a machine gunner and rifle platoon leader in the 45th Infantry. When the Murrah Federal Building was bombed in Oklahoma during a domestic terrorist act in 1995, he was deployed to the site and worked among other responders at the devastation, receiving the State Activation Medal and Humanitarian Medal. Desiring to continue to serve the public, Brian became a career firefighter as well as an EMT for 8 years in the Kansas City area. He had a great marriage, beautiful home, and a career he loved. Due mainly to the stresses of emergency work, Brian began self-medicating by heavily drinking. Failing health led Brian close to death. His kidneys, liver, and bone marrow became heavily damaged and were shutting down. After a painful divorce, homelessness, and suicidal ideation, Brian finally entered a 90-day treatment program for addiction and post-traumatic stress. Brian accredits his faith in God, his mother, and newfound purpose of helping others for saving his life, and founded Veterans for Life USA to reach others who are still struggling. Brian, it is awesome to have you on.
It's great to be here, man. On with another firefighter. I've done probably, I think this may be around 16 or 18 podcasts, and it's just different. It's different when you're on with another firefighter, emergency worker.
It's good, right? I mean, it's I've done a few with some cops and whatnot, and us bucketheads, man, we just kind of jive, and like we were talking about earlier, I'm sure there's gonna be some times here tonight where we finish each other's sentences, and that's great, and I think it's awesome that you're here, Brian. Your story is very much echoes what we try to talk about here when it comes to resilience. And anyone who knows and follows you on social media has seen a lot of your story. And I'd like you to kind of just give us a little bit more than what I just read here, and sort of tell us what Brian Paul does, and kind of get Brian Paul to where he is now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Again, thanks for having me. I always feel like I'm just grateful to be around, to be able to share my story, and grateful for life, man, just to be alive and be able to see the sunset and have friends and family. But so my story started out. I am from Mustang, Oklahoma, and played sports. Grew up out in the country riding horses and fishing, hunting. I don't know if any of our viewers remember the old Honda 3-wheelers.
Oh God, the death machines.
The death machine. Yeah, that's what me and my friends rode out in the country, and played football in high school. And so then I graduated there in 92, and then went to Oklahoma City University and joined a fraternity, walked on the basketball team there. And me and a friend who's now a lieutenant colonel in the National Guard joined together. And it really wasn't out of patriotism or having our college paid for. We just wanted to be going and blowing shit up, man.
Nice.
I love it. And blow shit up. That's why we joined. So we went of course, we joined, we went infantry and went to Fort Benning and back to Benning, and then back to Benning for JEP school, and Fort Hood, Texas, Fort Lewis, McCord, Washington, and Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And it wasn't long after I joined the National Guard is when the Murrah building was bombed. If people remember Timothy McVeigh and that incident happened down there, that was at the time it was the largest act of terrorism on U.S. soil.
Right.
168 people, including 19 kids, and so I spent 2 weeks down there doing all kinds of different tasks. But so I fulfilled my military obligation, moved up to Kansas City. I took a job with Roadway Express, the trucking company, for about 4.5 years, and we got bought out by Yellow Freight, and God was just tugging on my sleeve again,
Hmm.
and I guess I wasn't quite ready to to get into corporate America. I still wanted to serve, so I decided I want to be a firefighter, and I found out that in order to do that, you had to go and get your EMT or paramedic.
Hmm.
So I put myself through EMT school and then a fire academy and started volunteering for a couple of years, and then I went full time there in the Kansas City area in a district that answered about 7,000 calls a year. And I'd always been a social drinker, but for whatever reason, I got into that pattern of self medicating after those tough calls, and
Hmm.
after a few years, it just got progressively worse. I found myself in a full blown addiction to alcohol and doing all the things that addicts do. You know, my drug of choice was alcohol, and that led to a very painful divorce and homelessness and the loss of a job. I went on light duty after a back injury and suicidal. I put a little piece of shit Lorcan 380 under my chin,
Hmm.
and I believe I remember not pulling the trigger because it wasn't a very big gun.
Hmm.
Didn't want it to leave me, you know, a vegetable and people having to care for me.
Right.
So my attempt at suicide was alcohol, um, and my rock bottom was sitting in my 2007 Jeep in a park in Kansas City, and I believe it was January, and I had a 44-ounce quick trip cup that was full of mainly vodka,
Hmm.
and I had to hold it with two hands because my hands were so shaky that if I held it with one, it would spill. I would just drop it, and I really didn't. I think there was two keys there to my turnaround at that very moment, and that was that God, without question, spoke to me and said, "You know, Brian, there is something else out there that to live for."
Hmm.
And just it was just in a whisper, but it was clear as day that God was telling me, "Hey, man, not yet. This is not your time." And you know, the love for my mother, who throughout the previous 2 years of struggling so bad, just never gave up on me. And should she have given up on me, I would not be here.
Hmm.
And my son Aiden was 11 years old at that time, and just the thought of, I always had him in the back of my head that he was gonna be growing up without a father, and uh, so that was my turning point.
Hmm.
I put down that cup of vodka, and I picked up the phone and I called my mother, and
Hmm.
there was the gun in the seat next to me. Chose to not pick up the gun, to put down the vodka, pick up my phone and call my mom.
Thank God you did, man.
Yeah, well, and that's the part of my story that, like you said, thank God, and I'll share later. There have been a lot of lives saved since, and
Hmm.
if that happened, then I don't know about all these other people, you know.
Right.
And so I went home, and my mother, another a moment there in my recovery is made it back to Mustang, Oklahoma from Kansas City, and my mom knew how sick I was, and she said, "Brian, you're gonna die, but it's not gonna be in my house.
Hmm.
You either go to English Mountain Recovery in Tennessee, or you're out on the street." And for a mother to say that to
Right.
her son, man. So I listened to my mom, thank God, and a few days later, I found myself in Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents had driven me there, and and in a place called Blunt Hospital, and that's where I went through 8 days of detox. And a doctor there told me that I had a choice. I could either live for the next 8 days or until I was 80. And
Mm.
because my bone marrow was actually shutting down and not producing red blood cells like it should. And that's why I had bruises all up and down my body, and
Right.
just plain bruises because I was literally dying.
Mm.
So I went through the 8 days there, and finally made it my way to English Mountain Recovery. It's near Sevierville, Tennessee. And I spent 90 days there where I did equine assisted therapy with horses for 6 weeks.
Mm.
Did a 12-step program, AA, what we call doctor's hour with an addiction doctor, acupuncture, trauma therapy with my therapist Julie. And if anybody's ever been through trauma therapy, you know you've got a good trauma therapist if they're rough on you, because she was
Yes.
rough.
That's the key part right there. They got to be rough.
It was rough, man. She was taking no bullshit. So equine assisted therapy, which is one of the things I talked about during my public speaking. Finished that up, and there at the very end, I was English Mountain Recovery is sitting up about 3/4 way up a big mountain in the Smoky Mountains, and you can overlook Mount LeConte and these 6,000 to 7,000 foot mountains up there. And I was looking over, in the horizon, and it's just like God said, "Hey, man, you remember that time in the car when I said, 'Hey, there's a purpose for you?'"
Mm.
And I started thinking, I was like, "Man, if I went through all this stuff, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, struggle with addiction, I thought, man, there's got to be a whole bunch of others like me out
Mm.
there, because we, as you can attest, we all have mainly the same experiences, same
Hmm.
calls, same 7 or 8 calls usually."
Yep.
So that kind of stuck, and I left the mountain, went home, and I started just kind of going through the grind of figuring out, how I was going to help people. And I started Veterans for Life USA in May of 2017, and we've since then have gotten just over 50 veterans and first responders in a life-saving treatment.
That's amazing. That's great. It's weird how your journeys. I know for me, there was a lot of, and I actually just said this with someone else I spoke to on the podcast. For me, I was angry when um, everything kind of hit the fan, right? When the shit hit the fan, and they were finally like, "Hey, you have PTSD. You're not just an angry, evil prick. You have PTSD, and this is why." I was angry. I was like, you know something? I started doing this job at a very young age, and I wanted nothing out of it. I just wanted to help people, and here I am. And one of the things, um, not so much addiction, but more drug and alcohol abuse is part of my story as well. Is such a staple in the firehouse. It always has been, and it's always been accepted. And short of getting in drunken brawls with your spouse, it was never frowned upon at all. It was always encouraged. And I honestly think that um, when you enter the fire service at a young age, which for men is any time before the age of 25, and honestly, probably even beyond that, you get so influenced that, hey, you have a tough call. We're gonna hit the 6 pack, or we're gonna go hit the bottle of vodka. We're gonna go hit this, and everything's gonna be right as rain. We're good,
Mhm.
and it is for a little bit until, as you know, it catches up to you, and it always catches up to you, man. And your story, um, seeing that sign, seeing that for you that sign from God. I think those of us who've been down this similar path, I think we've all had that moment, right?
You hit it on the head when you're in a high stress job, especially in a district, a department that answers a lot of calls.
Mm.
You start hitting the bottle, and then instead of having one source of stress with being your job, now you've got you got multiple sources of stress with a marriage that's on the rocks, and your kids and your friends, and now it's coming from multiple directions instead of just one with the alcohol.
Right. And it just builds and it dominoes. And for us, especially as male first responders, um, one of the things that's always sort of it's an unspoken thing, but it's sort of force fed to us is we don't take the job home, right? We just assume our spouses don't want to hear about it.
Mhm.
And an interesting, and we're gonna talk about this right now. Um, an interesting conversation I had with Brett Snow a few weeks ago. Brett was one of our guests on the podcast back on episode 2. He actually brought up a very interesting point. He did a study. He's got a master's degree and did a bunch of education, and he did a study and asked a bunch of couples, and he specifically asked spouses about basically the direct question of, do you want to know more about your spouse's job? So your first responder's job. And it was
Mhm.
like 48 to 52% wanted to hear about their day, wanted to hear about what they do. And we don't talk about it. We don't share that because it's just so ingrained in us to not do so. And I would rather imagine, Brian, that for you, that was probably a lot of what affected your marriage.
It most definitely was. As a matter of fact, when I met my ex-wife, you know, she had told she loved it, tell her friends, hey, my husband Brian, he works for this fire district, and gosh, you see the Comfort in fire, and yeah,
Mm,
my husband's on that, and it was all the romantic
right.
stuff, movies. But when I had to go to had a late night visit to the ER when I was on duty, we were fighting an apartment fire, and it was in July, and it was nothing really more than just dehydration. It
Right.
was like 90 degrees outside. And it was 10:30 at night, and I had to call her and let her know, hey, I was gonna be coming home, and things kind of started to change for her because then it wasn't like the movies anymore.
Right. It was real life.
Real life,
Yeah.
and he had heard about a few of the calls, and it started becoming real for her that,
Mm,
yeah, we really do go out and see some really bad shit, and we can actually get hurt or killed. So she didn't really want to hear about the things, and that's when things kind of started to change. And so then, therefore, I came home and I just would bury it further. I'd go out on our back porch and with that bottle of booze, and that was my spot. And sometimes I'd be back there all day long and drinking the bottles with the handle on it and finishing that, getting another one.
yep.
It's so we didn't know. I had no idea about post traumatic stress or even what it meant. I When I heard PTSD, I always thought of the Vietnam War
Right.
guy, or that I remember it referring to it as shell shock.
Battle fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we had no idea. So then when I got to treatment in Tennessee, that's when I was diagnosed, and my trauma therapist explained to me exactly what it is, and it's the fight or flight mode, and our brains it's stuck in a um, hyper vigilance mode,
Hmm.
and so therefore it explained why all the drinking, after I went full time. And so and I think this is important for people that are struggling with addiction and depression and other things. The way I explain to people that I hope makes a lot of sense, is it's best to get to the underlying cause of why all the drinking or using. So it's much like, you have a tree in your front yard that you need to go out and water. You want to water the roots of the tree to get to the core of the problem that fixes the whole rest of the tree.
Right.
So if you go out and you're trying, if you're struggling with mental health and you're trying an AA group approach or something like that, then you're basically just watering the leaves in branches, and you're really not doing much good.
Right, right. It's the other thing that kind of goes with that, hand in hand with that, is how um and this is, I think this would probably be valid for both men and women, but specifically men, we lie when we go to therapy. I've been in therapy since I was a kid, and I got diagnosed with PTSD in 2015 when I was whatever I would have been there, 37. You know what I mean? It's like we lie when we go to therapy, and that ends up just making the situation worse. So then you end up just saying, "Yeah, well, I had a bad shift at work," when really you had a call that reminded you of something from your personal life, and it triggered a bunch of shit, and whatever it is, or it's been compounding since maybe the dead kid call or whatever it might be, and we lie. That goes back. I got on the job in '96, and I always tell people the '90s were kind of a shit show when it comes to mental health in the first responder world. And we had cool turnout gear. We had the hip boots and long coats and shit like that, but mental health was not spoken of. And it was literally one of those things where you would just, yeah, well, just suck it up. It's a bad call. That's what we do.
Mhm.
And sure, and I know you'll get this, during the heat of the call, you have to kind of keep those dials turned up, right? And in order for us to do our job, that's important. But what about when the call is done? Even when we're just sitting at the station, playing cards, watching TV, busting balls, whatever it is, why do those dials have to be up there? And years and even decades of having those dials up like that all the time. I mean, how can there not be a PTSD and a burnout, epidemic going on right now in the first responder world?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you mentioned the fact that when we go into treatment, a lot of us like to just check the box and lie, kind of lie
Yep.
our way. That is so common, man. Especially when you're talking an alpha male guy that,
Hmm.
hey, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. Someone else wanted me to come to this program or whatever. The thing I think probably a lot of our viewers aren't real familiar with equine assisted therapy with horses.
Mm.
The thing about that is you can't lie.
Can't lie to an animal.
No, those horses are actually prey animals, and so they've got extremely high senses of alertness and intuition. I mean, it's crazy how they can tell. They can read facial expressions, and I mean, they know what's going on inside. So what equine assisted therapy is it's you have the person that's struggling with mental health, the horse, and then a trauma therapist that's trained in equine assisted therapy.
Mhm.
The trauma therapist is not really watching you. The trauma therapist is watching the horse,
Right.
because the horse is giving clues as you're going through your task on what's going on inside of you. So it doesn't matter. You can lie to the trauma therapist all you want to, but that horse is going to tell the whole picture.
Yeah,
And
call your bluff.
oh yeah, and there's no getting around it. They've got like a radar. You can't. So then there's trauma. There's dialogue that goes through that. So, for example, my first task that I think Julie, my trauma therapist, gave me was, she said, "Brian, go grab that bridle off of the fence post and go put it on the horse."
Mm.
I walk over there and I grab the bridle, and I walk back over the horse and I just start putting it on the horse's face.
Hmm.
And I start trying to get it on, and the horse is pulling back. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You know, I totally skipped the part of going over and you're kind of asking permission to be in that horse's space. And
Right.
you're gradually getting that horse comfortable with you. So I think as first responders, we're used to go, 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 get the shit done,
Hmm.
get the cutters and spreaders out, cut that bitch open, get them to the hospital. You're not there asking permission.
No.
You're getting on it. You're doing CPR, whatever you got to do. So with equine therapy, it's a transition from unknowingly having to take control and presenting things. So Julie, my therapist, would say, "Okay, let's talk about the way that you just treated that horse. You went and picked up that bridle, you just shoved it right on that horse's face without saying a word. Let's talk about your marriage now.
Mm,
I didn't want to talk about it
of course not.
because
Of
it
course not.
made total sense. And
Yep.
she said, let's talk about your 11-year-old son, Aiden, and how you treat him.
Mm,
I didn't want to talk about that because it made total sense.
yep.
So that's what equine therapy is all about.
And that's amazing. I've heard a lot. I actually haven't experienced it myself. I experienced, like service animals with like dogs and whatnot. We've had a family friend who used to train them. And but it's interesting that you bring up the control part, and we're going to actually talk about that in a few seconds. We're just going to take a quick break, folks, and have a quick word from our sponsors, First Responder Coaching.
Coaching is here now for all first responders and their families. When it comes to the job and the stresses that come with it, we at First Responder Coaching know exactly how it can affect every aspect of your life and the lives of those around you. That's because we are first responders and their families. First responders are well versed in reacting to a situation. It is literally what we do as firefighters, law enforcement, dispatch, and EMS personnel. When trauma enters our lives, we react to it by tucking it down away somewhere in our minds. But we carry it with us and it never really goes away. We need to stop carrying trauma into every aspect of our personal and professional lives. It's time to start having proactive, powerful conversations right now to gain a better balance in the responder's whole life. This is true for their families, especially the spouses. Take that first step in making some of the most important improvements in your life. Visit www.1strespondercoaching.org now to make an appointment to chat with FRC. A coach will reach out, and before you know it, you'll be on your way to living a proactively fit lifestyle.
All right, so I'm here with Brian Paul, and we just got done talking about equine therapy, and he brought up a word that is kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of trauma and a lot of PTSD talk, and that is control. And I didn't realize until, because like you said earlier, Brian, I really didn't know a lot about PTSD until, I got diagnosed with it. And I knew of it, of course, it's at that point, it was 2015. We've been hearing about the soldiers coming back and having PTSD, but I thought it was a military thing. One of the biggest things I ended up finding out was a lot of my trauma was so centered around a sense of lost control. And apparently it's very common with first responders, firefighters, and law enforcement specifically, because we have so much, what we think we have, so much control when we're on the job. We think that, we're putting the wet stuff on the red stuff, and, therefore we have control in that situation. And because of, or maybe because of our traumas, whatever they be, whether they're personal, professional, whatever they may encompass, we have a very high sense of loss of control. So I know for me, like I said, when I went through my therapy, we worked on a lot of control issues. Did you end up experiencing that when you were going through a lot of your recovery?
Yeah, and the trauma therapist, it helps you unravel that.
Mm,
If we're not if we're not aware of it, the whole those around us are like, hey man, you're you're they can see it, but we can't if we're not aware of it. So that trauma therapy helps us unravel that, and in turn that helps with the first step of defeating alcohol, and that's realizing that we're powerless over alcohol, and we
yep,
don't.
that's right.
It's the humility, and
And even if it's not alcohol, alcohol and drugs tend to be focused on a lot when it comes to the addictive substances. But there's a lot out there. I mean, I spent I worked in private EMS as well as municipal fire and EMS, and I can't tell you how many people I worked with that would spend half their paycheck, three-quarters of their paycheck on scratch tickets. Then there's porn, and then there's hookers and sex and cheating on your spouse. I mean, there's so many, and it all comes back to the same premise. It's all that we have no power over that, and you have to acknowledge that at some point. You have to acknowledge what you do have control over and what you don't. And I think that's a huge step in anyone's recovery is acknowledging that, because when you acknowledge what you do and don't have control over, that's when you can start growing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, it's a it's a serenity prayer as well, you know.
Hmm.
Uh,
The I think one of the things that sort of, we kind of talked about this when I mentioned about the firehouse always pushing, drinking and stuff like that. Part of this all feeds into the stigma, right? And as men, whether it's society based or culturally because of the job we did, there is a very heavy pressure to not talk about our feelings. And I know the Northeast tends to be whatever. We have our, when it comes to the fire service, you have New York and Boston and Philadelphia, and a lot of those tend to be at the forefront of anyone thinks of firefighting in America. They tend to think of those departments, right? And you always have the same image, right? Some guy with a burnt up helmet, with, you can't read the emblem on the front because it's all charred up, and he's got a big booger catching mustache and, you know, leather boots and all this. And it's like, oh, the tough guy stuff. Part of, what I experienced, and I'm going to toss the ball in your court in a second, was because of that tough guy mentality I had to maintain, being a bigger guy at 6'5", and, growing up in a firefighting family. I had to maintain that. And all I wanted to do was just be able to tell someone, well, that call really fucking sucked. And I'm having nightmares because of it, because of this, whether it was, whatever. And I'm always interested when I talk to people from other parts of the country, because, I'm just, in the recent years, I've only been able to get and talk to people from other parts. What was your experience when you first started reaching out, when you first started realizing you had to get help? The people in your circle, what did that look like when they realized Brian has addiction issues, Brian has trauma issues?
well, people in my department really uh they kind of reached in. I
Hmm.
didn't reach. Um, so our union rep, uh, he said, "Hey man, you're going to be called into the chief's office," and went and talked to the chief. And I was still, just, hey, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't know what you're talking about, kind of deal.
Hmm.
But I went from being what we call the golden child, and high evaluations and all my calls and doing real well, to not doing well at all. And I think everybody can notice. And so I never did reach out. And I think most, and uh, my my district really wasn't not up to speed on how to properly deal with someone that, one of the firefighters that is struggling. And
Hmm.
I was actually referred to a family counselor, not a trauma therapist. So I went and checked the box,
Right.
but I did more explaining what the fire service was like, and got very little, if any, useful therapy. And so I never did reach out. So now, being an advocate on the other end, I know how hard it is for folks to reach out. And there's times where I go a month and I don't hear from anybody. And I
Hmm.
get frustrated, and I'm thinking, man, I've got 5,000 followers. I was just on, I just shared my story on a television interview or something. Why the hell is someone reaching out?
Right.
But then I realized, and I remember back then, it's like, well, for the same reason you did.
Exactly. And
And
that's tough to hold on to. You know,
yeah.
we want people to reach out. That's why we do what we do, right?
Hmm. Yeah. And it's that. So what I, so I think what I really try to focus on now is not trying to be good at everything as
Mm.
far as it, just trying to be good at removing that shame, guilt, and embarrassment that was so heavy on me and so heavy on so many others. Removing that shame, guilt, and embarrassment, and replacing it with hope, inspiration, and understanding.
I love it.
And if we can do that, if we can just do those things, we're going to make some headway. We're going to keep making headway and reaching more people.
Amen. And I think we are. And I just had a conversation with someone. We talked. It was actually someone from Canada, and we talked about whether he felt that the stigma was changing. And I do. I feel that we are slowly, I think it's a glacier on molasses, how slowly it's moving, but it is changing. And just based in the last, we'll say 5 to 10 years at this point, with now, being in 2023, um, there is now departments that have full on clinicians on staff. They now have, I know of several departments in this country that have a full mental health division. Las Vegas is one of them, with Jeff Dill, who I'm sure a lot of our viewers and even Brian, I'm sure you've heard of Jeff Dill. Uh, Very big name in the mental health game, and it is starting to change. It is starting to change, and this kind of leads us into this next part that I want to touch on, and that's these. I always talk about it, the age thing. I feel like there is this bracket with those of us who have become advocates. There's an age bracket, and I think it's between 36 and like 52. Almost everyone I know, men at least, who do a lot of what we're doing are all in that age bracket. And that's great. And it's great for two reasons. The first one is we're men and we're older men, right? So we tend to be more respected and more looked up to. The other part, when it comes to culturally with the job, is we're the veterans, right? We're the salty guys. We're the ones who've been around. So if we're talking about this, the other guys will, and the ones coming in the door will. And I think that's a lot of what's changing the stigma and giving hope to those in the older generation and hope to the new generation. And what's I hope happens, and I'd like to get your input on this, is as time goes on and this becomes more of the normal conversation where we're dealing with this, the people who are now new, the rookies, the probies, the whatever, the people in the academy, they will end up having a career where there isn't the shame, there isn't the guilt that's associated with mental health and addiction, and they'll eventually be the administrators, right? They'll
Right.
eventually be the brass. And so one of the things I always talk to the guests about is proactive resiliency. And we tend to associate resiliency with after, right? So after the shit hits the fan, we establish our resiliency after we go through failed coping skills and whatever. Um, I like to think that if we can get these in to the academy level and the probies, these skills, this learning, this education, this what we're doing, um, this could really be the turning point, because you really need that generation to kick off. What's your thoughts on that when it comes to starting right away, starting at the academies in the schools?
Yeah, man, you made some really good points there, man. Yeah, I think you're right. After you said it, it made me realize that most of the advocates that do what we do are right around that same age group. You don't really
It's
have
weird.
ones or young ones. Yeah, it didn't dawn on me until you said that. But and then proactive. That is absolutely the key, man. Because why wait until a guy has a you know what was mental health issue that could have been fixed without going to a 90-day program,
Mm.
um and then therefore the addiction and the whatever level of using or drinking. uh, why don't we, and I agree, I think that there is progress, that why don't we be more proactive in the fire academies, in the MS schools. I remember my instructor briefly mentioning, "Hey, you're going to have some rough days. You're going to have to go and talk to someone about it." But that was about a 2-minute long conversation that was onto the 1-minute drill.
Oh yeah.
Remember? So why not? I agree. I think we're going in the right direction, and I think the more acceptable it is, and maybe unfortunately, the more problems that people become aware of, they become extending that in the fire academies, and not just saying, "Hey, you're going to need to talk to someone." Let's say, "Hey, you're going to need to talk to someone, and here's who to talk to, and here's a little bit about what happens."
Right.
Not taking a lot of time out of the fire academy, but just giving a little bit of information of, "Hey, here's your out if you need it.
Hmm.
Here's your avenue to help." Same thing in the fire departments, and having, hey, look, you just became a full-time firefighter. Congratulations, man. You're great at the job. We're excited to have you. And this can be a tough job. And here are some resources for you from day one.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's all about having those conversations, which is why first responder coaching is part of this podcast, is because I learned when I get connected with coaching just how important having those proactive conversations were. And it's really about jumping into this before there's a problem. And we're such a reactive culture, firefighters and cops specifically, but all responders. That's our job. We respond, we react. And even with our mental health, we're waiting until crisis happens.
Mhm.
And we need to stop doing that. It's killing us. And I honestly think that's been a lot of the driving change, has been how much more aware we are, how many of us are dying. And,
Right.
it's sad, it's awful, and it shouldn't be happening. But I'd like to think that these people aren't dying in vain. They're bringing about a change.
Mhm.
I hope they're bringing about a change, because there's got to be a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And a lot of it is knowing and education as well. Like when we go through the fire academy, we're taught, in my experience, we're taught from pretty much day one. If you have any sort of a problem, see your captain,
Mhm.
see your lieutenant,
Yep.
go chain of command. With mental health, instead of going to see your captain, which let's be real, most people aren't going to anyway,
No.
or we wouldn't have the problem, right?
Hmm.
So instead of going to see your captain, we need them to go to their HR lady or person, go in and close the door and say, I need help. Here's what I need help with. Okay. I'm depressed. I'm having problems with anxiety. I'm having problems with drinking or using. At that point in time, that HR person is locked in by HIPAA law.
Hmm.
That person can't go out the door and go tell the chief or captain or crew. So there's our avenue around the culture, right? The stigma,
Mm.
because there's laws already in place. And I've got some stories with that, but
I
to go
think we
along with,
all do. I think we all do.
yeah, but that's the avenue that I recommend people take. And then from there, it's if you've been on the job for a year or more, it's just using your FMLA and the crew, your chain of command. They don't know where you're at unless you want to tell them.
Right. And I hope that, eventually that doesn't have to happen. I mean, we right now, if you have medical problems, you have cancer or whatever, not even cancer, you get stub your toe and you can't walk on it. They know you're not coming in, right? And they will probably know
Mhm.
why. And I think with time, I think that hopefully it goes beyond just having to go directly to HR, and hopefully you can go to your captain or maybe the senior guy, maybe the senior man or woman on your shift is someone you can approach. Maybe the union steward, maybe someone like that. Who knows? But I think that's all. As the stigma breaks down, I think that will go with it. And like I said, the age things really was doing a lot of it, because it's the senior folks on the job right now that are willing to talk about this. There's so many of us in that age bracket that, got 20 plus years in the job, or had 20 plus years in the job or whatever, and are of an age where we're a little bit more respected. And when we talk, people listen,
Right. Yeah.
you know?
And it's a kind of a very short story. I had worked under a captain on a shift that I was forced onto due to seniority,
Hmm.
and uh, no one liked to work on this shift, man. But
There's always that shift, right? It's usually C shift is usually that one, right?
this one was A shift. Yep.
Oh man, go figure.
And he was just a real old school crusty bastard, man. There's just no other way around it. And it was just, a, in my opinion, kind of a toxic environment. And that's why no one wanted to work on a shift. But I um, had just fairly recently, about a year and a half ago, uh, heard that he is now an advocate.
Hmm.
and helping people with mental health, and so he's kind of turned the corner himself, and so hopefully he's that he's having a better influence on that district.
It sounds like he probably faced his own demons and finally realized that, in my experience, I think a lot of the people who are so quote unquote against talking about this probably have more problems than the people who are speaking about it or willing to hear about it. Um, and I think the turning point with a lot of these people is when they finally get an opportunity to face them. Uh, I was not too dissimilar back in the day. I was definitely I didn't necessarily call anyone out if they were having issues, but I was definitely someone who, just because of my own issues, because I wasn't facing them and I was terrified by them, I was someone who just expected everyone else to do the same. And
Mhm.
maybe it's an alpha male thing, maybe it's a guy thing, maybe it's just the culture. But I think for a lot of us, when we finally face our shit and get ourselves out of the suck, it's, you become a more approachable person, you become a more warm person, you become, honestly, when you deal with your feelings, you become a stronger person. And I know you know this.
Yeah, yeah.
you know
We had we had one of our guys on that shift, Matt Young, good friend of mine, and really good young firefighter. Real likable guy. We used to he and I would go out in the in the fire bay, and we did shift change, and came in one morning and heard the news he had ended his life with a firearm the night before.
Mm.
And maybe that had an impact on that captain that has now kind of turned the corner, and you know not being the asshole he was.
Mm. It's usually the defining moment, right? I think we all have them.
Yeah. So, but so yeah, so I got out of treatment, and it's kind of a new lease on life, like hitting a reset button. And I was telling you, it's removing the shame, guilt, and embarrassment, and replacing with hope, inspiration, and understanding. And when this stuff started kind of gradually coming to me, that's what I do now. Is I like to share my story of recovery. As I mentioned earlier, I played high school football, and I graduated in '92, and I hadn't played since I was 17, 18 years old, and I had been doing push-ups at English Mountain. And when I started there, I could only do 15 push-ups because I'm telling you, I was sick.
Right.
Health. I started doing push-ups, and by the time the last month I was there, I was doing 300 a day every day.
Wow.
And I got out and I got back home to Oklahoma, and I was approached by the owner of the Oklahoma City Jaguars semi-professional football team, and he said, "Hey man, I know you were a pretty good player in high school, and wonder if you want to just come try out." I said, "Man, you do realize I'm 44. I was 44 at the time, and well, just come and try out. It's full on tackle football. It's the real deal." And I'd asked my friends and family, and most everybody said, "Man, it's not a good idea." So, so of course, that's what I ended up doing. I went and tried out, and there's a lot to that story. But long story short, I had made the Oklahoma City Jaguars football team at the age of 44.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm not the way I was when I was 18. I wasn't 18 anymore. I was playing against
None of us
play.
are, Brian.
I was playing against guys in their early 20s. That some of them are Division I guys, and
Oh boy.
uh, so I played. And then so through that, I had a buddy of mine that I went to OCU with. That's in the local acting community, and here in Oklahoma, they're actually making quite a few movies around here.
Hmm.
And Brian came and says, "Hey man, they're doing this movie called The Turkey Bowl, and all these big celebrities in it: John Beasley, Barry Switzer, Matt Jones from Breaking Bad,
Hmm.
Don Donald from Forgetting Sarah Marshall, all these guys." And again, I'm like, you, you realize I'm not an actor, right? I mean, I'm a grunt. I'm a 45th Infantry Division grunt and firefighter. So again, I said, well, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So fast forward a year and a half later, and there I am up on the big screen in the season premiere of the Oklahoma premiere of the Turkey Bowl that got picked up by Lionsgate. This movie went nationwide, and I'm sitting in the movie theater right next to Barry Switzer and all these other celebrities and the producer and my mom, watching myself on the big screen. I'm going, how did this guy get up there?
Life's a crazy journey, right?
It's crazy. Um, I originally began sharing my story in at English Mountain, and to the kind of a small group of guys that were in our group therapy, and I was embarrassed. I didn't think anybody would care,
Hmm.
and I started sharing my story, and I just fought through. I just fought through the shame and guilt, embarrassment, and as I began realizing it was helping people, I started doing television interviews, and I think at this point now I've done 15 television interviews, 18 podcasts, 24 times on national radio,
Hmm.
social media, and it's just sharing your story. And then I was sponsored to speak live speaking um, with a program called Transformations Treatment Center in Florida, where we've gotten 24 of the 50 veterans and first responders in there. So they were sponsoring me to go fly out in different cities around the country
Hmm.
and share my story. So looking back, it's like I never in my wildest dreams thought that this is the path that God would have for me. But remember back when I was saying you back in the, when I was telling you back in the car when I was struggling and suicidal and addiction.
Yep.
Looking back on that, I'm like, now I think, man, this has been incredible. And all I've done through my recovery is said yes to God.
Sit.
That's it.
It was that fork in the road, man, and it's it's weird. It's weird when you go down whatever form of recovery it is, and you embrace it and you own it. It's weird to look back. Our stories are similar in a lot of ways, and the opportunities I've had since I've healed and began healing, your work in progress, obviously, but um, is mind blowing because I never would have thought I would do like you. I never would have thought I would do the things I'm doing these days. 20 years ago, and I was the same way. I'm a grunt. I was always a private in both jobs, and I always thought I was just going to run calls the rest of my life, and I was okay with that. But like you sit here now, and it's like, oh, I'm doing this and doing that, and it's like I love it, and it sounds like you love it, and it's just this was God's plan. This is it was not the alternative. It was not to not be here.
Yeah, it really is amazing. We have we have our way, and God has His way, and my way was, originally, going out with alcohol and a bullet,
Right.
and God plans. And like I said, I am just like everybody else watching this podcast. I just say yes to God's plan.
That's what you got to do. Right.
Yep.
So I always ask this, and I think I already know your answer. I think I know your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway because our viewers may not. I like to ask people if you could go back and do it all over again, knowing what you know now, would you?
Man, that is when I look backwards, uh man, I'm not gonna lie to you, it can get really, really depressing,
Hmm.
you know, losing a job and not going nearly as far in the military as I would have. That looking back is depressing, but looking forward, it's very, very positive.
Right.
And imagining, what's ahead. And the biggest thing for me is we're all gonna leave this earth someday.
Hmm.
And it's not about us. It's about what we leave behind. And so that being said, I, I'm I'm blessed that I had those, I found that dark pit and made it out. And so the answer to that is yes. I'm glad that I went in this direction, and because it's God's plan for me, and not my own. Like I say, as hard as it is to look back on the failures, looking forward, it's really exciting. So yeah, I don't think I'd change it.
Amen, man. I'm the same way. And I think we're all, I don't like the expression everything happens for a reason. I changed the words to basically say the same thing, and that is we are all where we're supposed to be at any given moment. And that that all, whatever you believe in, everyone believes in different things, but if it's God's plan is what you believe in, that is basically that. If his plan is to have you in a certain spot, you're going to be there. And um, those of us, all of us, but those of us who are trying to do what we are, who have been where we were, um, we're where we're supposed to be, I think. And I hold on to that every day. And I have the same. That's why I said I don't need to ask you, but I'm going to ask you because maybe other people would have a different impression. But I knew you were going to basically say that because that's how I feel, man. That's exactly how I feel.
Yeah. Hey, I want to, if it's okay with you, man, I'd like to. We've got a couple of things I want to show real quick to the audience, but this is our Veterans for Life USA pamphlets, and that is actually my bio that you read earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the front, when you start out an organization, you start real generic. Sometimes you have to pull pictures off the internet, and
Oh yeah.
later I'll go back and go, God, man, that was really not a very good pamphlet. But and these, we've actually got two of our success stories. This guy's name is Nick Thayer, and he was a Oklahoma City area firefighter EMT that I found in crisis, and was able to get him into treatment. And just an incredible story. Myself and one of our Veterans for Life volunteers actually literally picked him up out of his deathbed and got him to the airport, and just a miracle story. And I went to tour transformations. I think this is the second time I was down there. This guy Nick, he stayed after treatment, and he's a firefighter paramedic down there in the Delray Beach area. He actually picked me up from the airport this time, and
Full circle.
yeah, full circle, man. This guy's name is Jason Mormon. He's an Army vet. We were able to get him into treatment. Another great story. But these are our pamphlets, and we've also got, and so we, of course, we use these. These are great tools to have because, it's actually success stories, and we use those during booths and events and speaking and all kinds of stuff. And then we've got these challenge coins. I'm trying to get where.
Nice. I can see it. Yep.
Yeah. These were donated, and you can see, they're nice call.
Yeah,
nice.
those are beautiful.
It says, when the demons come, call me, and we'll fight them together.
I love it.
And these coins are not, they're not sold. They're not just given away. These are earned through extraordinary efforts, both to our Veterans for Life team, as well as supporters and people from treatment programs, and just people making a big impact. But that's one of those things when you run an all volunteer organization, you have to come up with different ways to recognize, your team's efforts.
That's right.
That's what, it's, running Veterans for Life. It's not like your boss at work that, has a paycheck and benefits for you. It comes down to just leadership, leading people the way you'd want to be led. And
amen to that.
We've been doing it now, going on 6 years. So
that's amazing. It's always good to hear that there's still some good people that are trying to be a leader and not just a boss or point of authority.
Yeah, well, I tell our people, I'm the president and founder of the organization. We have a board and leadership, but as I tell them, they don't work for me. I work for them. they tell me what they need to be successful at performing our mission. And so it's kind of like you have the chain of command that looks like a triangle. You have the chief on the top, and then your captains and your paramedics and your EMTs.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is kind of reverse, where
Hmm.
where me being the president, I'm on bottom, and our volunteers, they're the ones that get to help make decisions and lead.
Yeah, the basis of leadership right there, is it's lonely at the top, but at the same time, you want to give the tools and the resources and support to those who are helping really make either the company or the organization function, and that comes through leading them, not bossing them. And that's always so refreshing to hear.
Mm-hmm.
It
Well,
really is.
it's for me, it's a lot of work, but so the concept is, instead of having one leader that puts in the grind and kind of blazes a trail, leaders making leaders.
Mhm.
So instead of leader, now you've got 9 leaders.
Right. It's all about the next step up, right? It's all about training the person coming after you. And bosses don't do that, leaders do. And as you are well aware, in the fire service specifically, but first responder world, just because they have rank doesn't make them a leader.
Right.
Even in the military, it's the same way.
Yeah, those bugles or stripes or bars. So I think to folks, to the grunts on the ground, that shiny thing on your hat really doesn't mean a whole lot.
Nope.
It's how you lead and how you treat your troops.
It really is. It really is. And that's huge, man. That's huge. It's always good to hear that there's people out there, trying to instill the great qualities that leaders really should have. Because unfortunately, and I think this may never go away fully, but the first responder world definitely has a lot of folks that aren't the best of leaders. A lot of people just associate us having this because you have the brass that you are, and it is always the case. And so it's always refreshing to hear these organizations setting a good example. But Brian, this has been a great conversation, and I'm just glad we finally get to hang out and talk. Honestly,
it's been great. Yeah. So it's been good hearing your story as well. I know we kind of follow each other on social media for a while, but to be able to get together like this and talk, it's just been great, man. So again, thank you so much for having me,
Brian. It's been all my pleasure, and folks, stay tuned for more guests coming up as we now get into this new year. Today's episode has been with Brian Paul. Brian, thank you again for coming on. This has been a great conversation, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, folks. As always, take care. Stay safe.
Do what I had to do, and this is enough for me. Never meant to be a winner, never meant to be a quitter, but this is how I lose satisfaction. Ship thrills, ship tricks. Woo!